Hi, my name's Midge, and welcome to Midge's Gems, a guy in a hat that likes to talk about records. This has been a long time coming. I've watched vinyl community video films for years and really enjoyed them, and I've always wanted to do my own, but through confidence and lots of other reasons, I've never got round to it. And I just thought, well, why not? I can talk about records as much as the next man, and I love records. I've been collecting records since I was a teenager, so why not? So this is my attempt at doing a YouTube channel. My first time, so bear with me. Low production values and not a lot of know-how, but we'll hopefully get through it. I still talk about records, so that's the reason you're here, hopefully. And I know a lot of vinyl community videos do videos on recent pickups and buys and finds and things like that. I'm going to do mine a little bit differently. So there's some new stuff here, there's some old stuff, there's some stuff I've had in my collection for years, there's new things I've just picked up. So, but mainly this thread is, for me, is going to be like what I've been listening to for the last couple of months. So I meant to do this channel in January, so there's been a bit of a gap while I've plucked up the courage to do it. But these are all records that I've been listening to since January that have been on heavy rotation. So without further ado, I'm going to start with a blaxploitation soundtrack. I love blaxploitation films, and this is a film from 1973. It's called Gordon's War. I've had the soundtrack for years, but I've never actually seen the film. And I think it was over Christmas, I saw the film for the first time. And it is a really good film. It's one of the better blaxploitation films I've seen. It stars, as you can see, Paul Winfield, and all the way through the film I was thinking, I know this guy, I've seen this guy before, but I couldn't put my finger on it. And then eventually I realised Paul Winfield is the guy who stars in The Terminator with Arnie. He's the cop that looks after Sarah Connor when she's hiding, when she initially goes to the police. So this is the younger Paul Winfield, and he stars in a film where he is the Gordon of the title. He's a decorated Vietnam vet, and he comes back from the war to find his neighbourhood has been taken over by drug dealers and hustlers, etc., etc. And his wife has succumbed to a drug overdose, and he sort of decides to take vengeance and clean up his neighbourhood. So, with blaxploitation films, it's either sticking it to the man or cleaning up drug dealers in the neighbourhood, and this is a drug dealer neighbourhood film. He recruits his old army buddies to help, and unusually for a blaxploitation film, they try and take out the drug dealers as they would doing a military campaign. So there's a bit of a twist there. It's a bit of a different way of doing it, but everything I love about blaxploitation films is in there. It's low budget. There's some very peculiar fashions. There's some great sort of atmospheric scenes on the streets. There's a massive chase, obviously. But the unusual thing about this film is that most blaxploitation films have a kick-ass main theme, but this doesn't. Well, it does, but it's a ballad. So unusually, the main theme of the film is a ballad that keeps repeating during the film. So it's sung by, as you can see, Barbara Masons, who's a disembodied floating head there. It's got nothing to do with the plot. She does the ballad. It's called Child of Tomorrow, and like I say, it repeats during the film. But it is unusual for a blaxploitation film, although all the things you love about blaxploitation soundtracks, the killer themes and the funkiness, that's all in it. It's a really good soundtrack. The most popular or most well-known song on here is Hot Wheels, The Chase, which is obviously the chase theme at the end of the film. It's been sampled, it's been on loads of compilations. It's a really good driving, funky type instrumental. And a lot of the songs on here are obviously instrumentals, but there's the band that plays them are superb, and there's lots of killer sort of funk. There's lots of great things to sample on here. There's the slow songs as well. It features New Birth, an RCA artist act. They've got a track on here, Come and Dream Some Paradise, which is great. There's a song called Super Shine number 9 on it, which is from a great scene in the film where one of Gordon's friends is trying to get in with the hustlers, and he starts shining one of the pimp's shoes, and they're just like huge great big boots, and it's just the fashions of the time, but it's brilliant. Super Shine number 9. It's a great soundtrack, and like I say, it's really well played, really well produced, really funky. Also, it's the people behind the soundtrack have called themselves Al Elias and Andy Badale, and I didn't realise until I was looking into this, but one of the composers is actually Angelo Badalamenti. I always get that wrong. He did the Twin Peaks soundtrack years and years later, so it's him under a pseudonym. So he's involved. It's just a great soundtrack. This is not an original. It's a bootleg I picked up years ago. So obviously it's not. I think it was originally released on Buddha, but I've never managed to find an original copy of it. So this is always had to do. But yeah, great soundtrack. Well worth checking out. Next, we're going to jump on to a new release, new band to me, came out in January, and it's the Lambrini Girls. A two-piece group, very shouty, very punky, lots of humour in here as well. Phoebe Lunny and Lilia Massiera, and there's a drummer as well, which seems to be like a floating drummer. I think they've had a few drummers. And this is called Who Let the Dogs Out. Like I said, there's a lot of humour in this. It's very shouty, very angry, very political, but the songs are really, really catchy. And there's a lot of humour in there, which sort of balances a lot of the serious issues that they talk about. There's obviously like there's things like police corruption. There's toxic masculinity. There's things about the pressure on women to diet and look good. There's things about Nepo babies, and there's a song called, I'm not sure you can say this on YouTube, but I'll soon find out, Cuntology 101, which sort of reclaims the word and sort of uses it as a positive, and it uses the word, God knows how many times in it, but it's a lot, and that's really funny. And it's just a great album. It's just a great sort of hyped up, punky, catchy, angry album, but like I say, it's got a lot of humour in it, and that's what I like about it. And also what I do like about it is the fact that they've called it, the colour of the vinyl, which is a lovely sort of teal blue, they call it Gay Smurf Dick album colour vinyl, so that's new. So yeah, I like that. So that's the Lambrini Girls. Been listening to that a lot. Who Let the Dogs Out. Okay, the next one is another legend in the world of funk and soul, James Brown. So obviously everyone knows James Brown's famous 70s albums. The man's a legend. What can you say about him? But I'm always interested in the artist's later work, the things where they sort of tail off a little bit, or people ignore their albums and not really, they sort of dismiss them, or they're just forgotten. And this is one of them. I've been collecting James Brown's later albums over the last couple of years, late 70s albums, where his popularity started waning. He was struggling for a new direction. He was considered to be a bit outdated. And obviously, in the late 70s, the big thing was disco. So a lot of these later 70s albums, he sort of takes a dive into disco. The braggadocio still there, so he claims that he is the person who invented disco. So basically, everyone should be, thanking him for the recent rise of disco in the 70s. And like I say, a lot of his later 70s albums, he's sort of putting like a touch of, he's like dipping his toes into disco. And but they're nonetheless better for that. Disco isn't a dirty word. I love disco. But this is a really good album. You can understand why some people dismiss them. They are patchy. Some of them have a lot of retreads of his older stuff in a disco style. But this is unusual in terms of, I think it's 1979 this one came out. Yeah, 1979. And what's unusual for a James Brown album is he's relinquished all the songwriting and production duties to somebody else, which is highly unusual for a James Brown album. So this is produced and written and arranged by Brad Shapiro, who was a famous record producer. So I'm guessing that James Brown's fortunes were declining. His record company thought, let's get him with a new hot producer and see what we can turn out. And I think this was actually a decent seller for James Brown that sort of time. Obviously, obviously the album's called The Original Disco Man, so again he's saying he invented disco. I'm not sure that's true, but he obviously he contributed towards the rise of disco, and this is basically him jumping on the disco train. It's not overly discofied, if that's a word, but it is a great album. There's some great tracks on here. It's Too Funky in Here, Let the Boogie Do the Rest, Star Generation. I think they are quite extended, so as you would imagine from a James Brown album, because a lot of his tracks are extended. But this is pretty decent, although it's never really explained why he's in a disco on his own. Perhaps people didn't want to, hear his songs in a disco at that time. But and who brings a wicker chair to a disco? That's another thing that probably put people off. But great album cover. Obviously, you've got your disco ball there, haven't you? So it's definitely on the disco train. James Brown albums, late James Brown albums, they have sort of funny sort of statements in them. There's if he was bringing these albums out today, you could imagine he'd get probably cancelled for some of the things he says on these, and some of the titles of his albums. But I might talk about them on another video. But the faux pas he makes on this one is a song called Women or Something Else, which they are, aren't they? They're something else. And it's sort of like This Is a Man's World type vibe, but he spoils it at the end. Well, he bigs women up all the way through, but he spoils it at the end by saying women can be bitches, and then he sort of backtracks a bit and then says, well, I can be a bitch too, so that makes everything all right, doesn't it? Yeah, but it's a great album for James Brown. Check out James Brown's late 70s albums, because they are really good. I would recommend trying. They are patchy, but this is one of the better ones. This is really good, this one. But it depends on what your attitude to disco is. I love disco. So the next one, another new album, Franz Ferdinand, The Human Fear. There's not been a Franz Ferdinand album for a while. They had a best of, I think, but I don't think they've actually released anything for quite some time. And I wasn't aware, but the lineup's changed. So I think there's only 2 members left from the original lineup, and they've got like a new drummer, a guitarist, and keyboardist. And it's a really fresh sounding album. I was surprised how good it was. And to be honest with you, I've really played this a lot. It's been on heavy rotation. And one of the reasons is it sounds really fresh. And it also, it's one of those albums where every song could be a single. It's a really strong album, I think. And it's a real return to form from Franz Ferdinand. It's got all their classic elements of the sound, but it's just full of hooks, and it's full of different types. It's more electro based than riff based, I would say, but there's obviously guitar in there. But it's a superb album. It really is. Obviously Alex Caprianos is still there, and Bob Hardy from the original lineup. But you've got Julian Corry on keyboards, Audrey Tate on drums, and Dino Bardo on guitar. So they've got the new members in there. It's nicely packaged. There's a nice booklet from the recording sessions, lyrics, things like that. It's really well packaged. Gatefold sleeve. And I'm not sure if it's coloured vinyl, I can't remember. Is it coloured vinyl? Yes, nice white vinyl. But yeah, it's a really great LP. I've been playing it a lot, like I say. Killer album, great return to form. Lots of good. Every song could be a single, I think. It really grows on you. So I'd highly recommend that. Franz Ferdinand, The Human Fear. That's a new one. Next, we've got Peter Gabriel. His first solo album from '77, I think it is. I've always been a big Genesis fan. Well, early Genesis, to be fair, and I've never really checked out Peter Gabriel's solo albums for some reason. I've just never bothered. So when I was secondhand hunting a while ago, I saw this album, so I thought, I'll just give it a go. Always loved the Hypnosis cover with the car on it. So I thought, yeah, just give it a go. And I've been really pleasantly surprised with it, to be honest with you. Obviously, his first album since he left Genesis. It starts off with a really Genesis-sounding song called Moribund the Burgermeister, which is a typical Genesis track, and it's a typical Genesis song. I think it talks about St Vitus Dance, an outbreak of St Vitus Dance where people just voluntarily move and the guy's just trying to find out why it's happening. It's got funny vocals. It's just a really Genesis sounding song. Sorry, that's my dog in the background. Sorry, he's a bit of a critic. He's not a big fan of Peter Gabriel. Yeah, so it starts off with a very Genesis sounding track, but then it changes to Salisbury Hill, which is the most famous song on here, big chart hit, great sort of acoustic type riff on it, which talks about him leaving Genesis. So I'm not sure if that was deliberately sequenced in that way. You've got like what came before, like a Genesis sounding track, and then you've got a track about him making the decision to leave Genesis and go out on his own. But yeah, it's great that it's sequencing that. I'm not sure if it was deliberate or not. But it's a real mixture of styles. I was surprised, and it's not really Genesis-y, apart from the first song. It's very 70s rock sounding album. Oh, there is a lot of diversity there, but there's some great tracks on here like Modern Love, Down the Dolce Vita, just songs with really good big sort of classic 70s riffs in, which surprised me. You've got some very big names on here as well. You've got Robert Fripp, obviously, on guitar. You've got Tony Levin, bass. Steve Hunter, guitar. Dick Wagner. Obviously, it was produced by Bob Ezrin, so a lot of these people are, people who played on albums that Bob Ezrin has produced, like Alice Cooper and things like, and artists like that. So he obviously chose a very big name producer to start his solo career off. I think the other famous song on here is "Here Comes the Flood," which is sort of like a sci-fi type song about what would happen if we could all read each other's minds, and everyone's minds opened up to each other, and whether the flood of mental thoughts and whether we could deal with it. And that's one of his most famous songs on here. I think he always said it was overproduced on here, so I think when he performs it live, it's very much stripped back to piano and a sort of arrangement. But that's a great song. So yeah, I've been enjoying this. It's a real mixture of styles, and it was better than I thought it was going to be, to be honest with you. So I'll probably investigate more of these. The other notable thing I discovered about this album was I thought that was like an image effect, but apparently he had some contact lenses done that was sort of like mirrored, or they looked like ball bearings or something, and he used to put them in and freak people out. I think he also had to sign something to the people that made them to say that if there was any damage done to his eyes due to light reflecting in them onto the back of his eyeballs or something, that he wouldn't go back and sue them. So I'm not sure that was a great idea. I'm not sure you'd be able to get that in Specsavers these days, but he obviously thought it was a good idea. Peter Gabriel, first album. So yeah, I enjoyed that very much. Yeah. Next, we've got another new act. Well, not particularly new, but modern act. Shit and Shine. Great title for a band. This is a band I've been into for a while, but it's one of those bands where I sort of dip in and out of the catalogue because they're one of those really cool bands that they can turn their hand to anything, a bit like King Gizzard. So they do electronic type stuff. They do sort of big beat type stuff, but they also do things like slow chord grunge albums and metal albums, jazz albums. It seems they can turn the hand to anything. I think the main guy in it is called Craig Klaus. They're a Texas band, and they can turn the hand to anything, and it's like I think it's a floating lineup as well. But I tend to dip in and out of their catalogue. I don't like everything they do because obviously it's so across the board. But when it tends to be the more beaty type things that I like, or the electronic type albums they make. This is an EP that came out in I think it was some years ago, and it's just been reissued. It was reissued last year. It's called You Were Very High. And the reason why I loved it so much and picked up on it, it's only a 4-track 12, which I don't tend to buy much of these days, but they have a really good sense of sampling. When they sample bands, and actually it's sort of not really what you would expect, but they turn it into something really new, turn it into something something really different. It's really clever use of sampling. So, for example, the title track on this is "You Were Very High," so it samples Steely Dan's "Black Cow," and it's all like a repeated refrain of the bass going all the way through it from that record, and a few vocal samples from the song at the end. It's about 15 minutes long, so obviously it was like a club type mix. I think it went down really well in the clubs, and so I don't know whether they officially licensed the samples or whether they've just re-released it, but it's great. It's just really good sort of like beats, or like really clever beats, this type instrumental with Steely Dan samples on it, which was what initially drove me to it. But the thing with Shit and Shine is they've also got a lot of humour in the music. So there's a track on here called "Dave, Have You Ever Been to London?" and it samples a lot of the characters from the Royal Family comedy TV programme in the UK. So you've got that sample of "Dave, have you ever been to London?" and you've got Jim Royal answering him back, and it's great. It's the sample that runs throughout the song, and it's really cool. There's also a sweary Ray Winston sample that goes through it as well. Again, quite beatsy, quite sampled, but a lot of humour. Really, it's a really great track. There's also another track which is sort of like a more R&B influenced one with a sample that I don't quite recognise him, but there's another 10-minute track there. The last one is called "Take You Some Time," and that's superb as well. Bizarrely, it samples Toto's "Georgie Porgy," but it takes some of the big refrains out of it and again makes it into sort of like a beatsy club sort of version. But the way they've done it is just genius. It's just, you never would imagine somebody taking Toto sample and making something like this out of it. So I think that's called "Take You Some Time," but it's absolutely superb. And I'm a big Toto fan, so it's meat and potatoes for me. I love it. It's just great. So Shit and Shine, Take You Some Time, 4-track EP, really worth picking up. I think this is limited to 300 copies. Again, I don't know if it's because of sampling issues or what, but check that out. That's really good. Next is 1970 album by Laura Nyro, "Christmas and the Beads of Sweat." This album it's just sublime. It's gorgeous. I've been listening to this a lot recently. I've had it a long time, but it's one of those albums you sort of like you go back to, and it's just gorgeous. It's one of those albums where it's like a rainy day album. It's sort of like you sit and you get comfortable, you get all nice and warm, and it's just like a nice warm blanket type of album. Her vocals are sublime. It's full band arrangements at times. It's very stripped back, and it's just her accompanying herself on piano on other times. It's produced by Arif Mardin, who obviously Aretha Franklin's producer, and also, interestingly, Felix Cavaliere, who was a member of the Rascals and a great keyboard player. He also co-produced this album as well. He's obviously another great songwriter. And it's sort of like a half and half album. It's a lot of it's got the famous Muscle Shoals players on it. Barry Beckett, Eddie Hinton, Roger Hawkins from the Muscle Shoals sound section. So the first half of the album is backed by them, and the second half is more her on her own. But there's also some other big artists. There's Chuck Rainey on bass, Cornel Dupree on guitar, Ralph McDonald on percussion. Also, Duane Allman is on here as well. He contributes an electric guitar solo on one of the songs, and it's a gorgeous record, absolutely gorgeous record. There's a cover of the Drifters up on the roof on here, but all the rest of it is their own compositions. When I Was a Freeport, You Were the Main Drags on it. That's quite a famous Laura Nyro song. That's a very catchy, bouncy one. But it's just like lyrics and things like that. And the arrangements. It's sort of like a warm, comforting blanket on. It's just one of those albums you sort of sit with headphones on and just sort of like It's really vivid as well. Her lyrics sort of like it's very evocative. She really sets a time and a place. And also it does get quite dark. There's a song about drug addiction on here called "Being on a Train," which is quite. It's quite harrowing in places. So, like, it's just your classic singer-songwriter album, but it's superb. It really is superb. This is an American pressing. I can't remember where I picked it up from, but I'm not sure if it's an original pressing or not. It's on the Columbia, obviously Columbia Red Album. So you can tell it's a US pressing. It's got a thick card sleeve and stuff. Like I say, from 1970, but again, great album, great album. Okay, I'm going to make this the last one because I don't want these videos to be too long and I've rabbited on too much already. So I'm going to end it with another recent pickup, a new album this year from Mogwai. I mean, I'm not a massive Mogwai fan. I've always considered them to be a bit of a poor man's Godspeed You Black Emperor, which is probably a bit unfair, but I was always a Godspeed fan rather than a Mogwai fan. And they do this, obviously they do the same type of music. It's sort of like instrumental rock. It's quite heavy. It's quite dark at times. But over the last, say, 5 years, I've really started investigating Mogwai's catalogue, and they are really good. So I've been enjoying that, and with the new album coming out, I thought, you know, I'll try it, and I've really been enjoying it. It's there's some really great tracks on here. High Chaos, What Kind of Mix Is This? Lion Rumpus is another great track as well. All largely instrumental. I always find with Mogwai that the sort of vocal tracks they do, they are quite shoegazy, and the vocals are heavily distorted. You can't always make the vocals out, and I'm not sure they overly work for me, those sort of tracks Mogwai do with vocals. I know they probably like to mix it up and, you know, not keep the albums totally instrumentally based, but they never usually work for me. Oh, there's a great song on here called 18 Volcanoes, which is really shoegazy, and it does really work. But again, atmospheric, dark, melody. There's lots of melody in there as well. Again, gatefold sleeve, really cool artwork, and it's a 3-sided album as well, so you know what's coming. There's the etching. It's also on clear vinyl. Clear vinyl. Side D has an etching. You might not be able to see it in this light. It says Mogwai on it. Pretty cool. I think it probably works better on a black vinyl, but there you go. 3-sided album. Yeah, really cool. Really enjoying that at the moment. So that's Mogwai, The Bad Fire. Like I say, came out Jan, Feb sort of time, but yeah, really enjoying it. So I'm going to leave it at that for now. You don't know how many takes it's taken to get to this stage, so I just thought, leave the mistakes in, just let them run, because this is like take 24. So, you know, but that's the end of my first video. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope I do more. Yeah, but hopefully the next videos will be shorter. No one wants to watch half-an-hour videos of me rambling on. But if you have done, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. See ya.